My name's Neil, as Paul said. I'm one of the ministers here, and we're continuing our series in Galatians. I know it's warm, but stick with me for about 20 minutes, and let's see what God has to say to us. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk in the monastery Gethsemane in Kentucky in America. And in his period when he was there, it was thriving. They had about 4 other houses that had been built because so many people wanted to be monks there. So many guests came for retreats for a day or for a week to be with them. And Trappist monks, basically, they did a few things. They prayed regularly. They worked hard on the land to produce crops. And they spent time together reading spiritual books whilst they ate together. They weren't allowed to talk to each other, and as you read one of his diaries, you see that they had a form of sign language that they learnt to kind of get around the rules a little bit so that they could go, "You all right? Yeah, I'm all right. You okay? Yeah." Well, I don't know what the sign language was. I would go in there and fake it and probably say something really insulting, but he speaks of being in that. If you've not read his book, The Seven-Storied Mountain, it is one of the autobiographies in Christian literature that I really recommend to you. It is wonderful. And I've just started his second one called The Sign of Jonas. And he talks about being in this monastery and how he's kind of got this pull to go to another monastery because he thinks a monastery somewhere else in America is maybe a bit better. But his abbot wants him to stay there and to continue writing spiritual books because he's speaking to America in the 1960s in a way that other religious writers aren't. And they're saying to him, you just keep churning out books and don't think about going to another monastery. One of the vows that monks make is the vow of stability. And in the Sign of Jonas, he says, by making a vow of stability, the monk renounces the vain hope of wandering off to find a perfect monastery. How many of us have thought down the years, maybe that church down the road is just a bit better than TVC. But maybe their children's work's a bit more dynamic. Maybe their minister's not so long-winded. Maybe the music's a bit more like I like it. Maybe they haven't got the plethora of annoying people that we've got at TBC who really get up my nose. Maybe, why don't I'll go there for a couple of weeks, just check it out and see if the Lord leads me to that church. Stay in the monastery you're in, Thomas. God's got things for you to do here. Can I say, if you do find the perfect church, you'll ruin it. So don't go. Go for a week, have a look round, take some notes, bring them back to me for how we can improve. But don't go there because you will ruin it, just as I will. Being part of a church means being part of a group of people where we sometimes hurt others and they sometimes hurt us. Now, I get it that we all move churches from time to time. Joe and I have moved churches, Tonbridge to Bexhill-on-Sea, where people go to die and then forget why they've gone there, to Bessells Green, and then back to TBC, and we retire here. I go and work my veggie patch and help out in various things. I get that we sometimes move, but I would suggest, especially in the Bible Belt of the UK, which is just outside the M25, all the way round, where there are so many wonderful live churches, I would suggest that sometimes we move too quickly. Just got an elder there walking out of the church building. Couldn't have timed it better. We can move too easily. And for those of you who have moved churches, whether you're online or in the room, I know the heartache it takes, the pain, the umming, the erring, all of the time and the history that we've put into that place and that people that we've come from. So if we do ever move, whether you've moved here or you're going to move from TBC to somewhere else, can I encourage you to do one thing? Don't take any invisible baggage with you. Because if we take that invisible, emotional and spiritual baggage with us, we will leave it in the next church that we go to. So if you've left a church and haven't you feel left it well, try and leave it well in retrospect. Maybe write to the vicar and say whatever it is that you need to say. I had a lady who left here about 9 years ago, and about 5 years ago we were doing an event together as churches, and she was at that event, and I thought, my immediate reaction was, oh great, it's her. And then she came up to me and I thought, oh, this is just wonderful. Switch on the Baptist minister charm. Hi. And she said, Neil, I left TBC a while ago and I left badly. And I really want to say sorry for that. I had stuff going on in my life and I just left and I'm sorry. I thought, oh, this is brilliant. Now she's been really gracious and I've got to try and lift myself to be. I went, thank you. Don't look for the perfect church. Sometimes we hurt others and sometimes others hurt us. And we see this pain in the next portion of Galatians as we look at chapter 4, verses 8 to 20. Verses 8 to 11 say this. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not gods. But now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you are turning back to those weak and miserable forces? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? You are observing special days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that somehow I have wasted my efforts on you. Paul says to them here, don't go back to slavery. It's what the Jewish people, the Israelites, have done throughout history. They keep going back to slavery when God gives them freedom. Don't go back to slavery under the law. When they came through the Red Sea and out of slavery in Egypt, the first thing they did when they saw the chariots from the Egyptians coming down on them was to turn to Moses and say, well, we might as well have died in Egypt, hadn't we? Why did God bring us out here? This is no good. Why can't we go back? I don't know if that was the Monty Python voice they used, but it just came to me in a moment of inspiration. And then when they're in the desert for 40 years, the number of times, can we go back to Egypt? At least we had food there. We had jobs. We had a visible God to worship. Aaron says, give me all your gold. Oh, I put it all in the fire and a golden calf just appeared, as if Paul Daniels was here working his magic. And Moses has to go up and get the 10 Commandments again. And then they go into the promised land. We want a king like everyone else. You don't need a king, you've got God. If you get a king, you're going to need armies, you're going to need chariots, he's going to want loads of money, he's going to want taxes, he's going to want a palace. Sound familiar today? We want a king. Okay, you can have a king, says Samuel, but you won't like it. And have some good ones, and they have some absolutely rubbish ones. They have some that grasp for God and some that punch God away. And time again, in all of Old Testament history, from the time that they have kings, it's we come back to God, we're sorry, we drift from God, we can't be bothered, a prophet comes in and tells us we're doing wrong, we try and kill that prophet, it doesn't always work, we listen to God, we come back to God, we drift from God, the prophet comes in, and they go slavery, 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 slavery. And Jesus comes and offers them a way completely out of slavery. Freedom, no holy days. I whisper it, but not keep Sunday special. Imagine saying that in the 1980s. I'm not saying it flippantly. Do you remember that drive for keep Sunday special? Somebody in church here said to me last week, Neil, when's your Sabbath? I said, mine's Friday, because I work on a Sunday. I was in Bexhill-on-Sea with Joe when Keep Sunday Special was rising, and a lady came up to me at the end of the service. We should keep Sunday Special nothing. And I said, so if you fall in the bath on a Sunday, do we phone them on Monday? No, I don't mean that. I said, do you read the Daily Mail on a Monday? Yes. Well, that's printed on a Sunday. Oh, and you don't want me to work anymore then? Oh, no, she said. The point isn't keep Sunday special, it's keep a day as your Sabbath that you set aside for God. It's not about calendars and festivals and certain things. Don't go into slavery. Don't worship idols, these gods with a small g that Paul talks about in this passage. How often can we, me, you, worship idols? Do you get into some Christian author and they are just absolutely the best? Everything they say is wonderful. Or there's a worship leader and every song they do is brilliant, even though we know a third of them are naff and we're not going to be singing them in 10 years' time. But we keep pushing because this person is put on a pedestal and they become an idol that we worship and we follow. Every idol that we worship and follow will let us down because they are human beings. Or they're a system, if they're an idol, that will let us down. Your investment pot for your retirement, your job that you think gives you absolute purpose until a new boss comes in and shunts you to the side. Idols fall. They are just golden calves. Paul says, don't keep the calendrical observances of the created order that the pagan cults have told you to observe. You're part of the new creation. You're set free from all of that. You can cope without those things. Calendars are helpful. Easter's great, but it moves every year, doesn't it? Every year. We come back after Christmas as a staff team. When's Easter this year? It's 3 weeks earlier. Oh no. We've got 3 less weeks to arrange everything. When's harvest? Well, when you want, really. Remembrance Sunday, always the same. Christmas Day never moves. I remember a 17-year-old footballer down at Tonbridge Angels at training one night. I was stood there with a physio who's 10 years older than me, and this 17-year-old said, Neil, I know you're religious and everything, but don't you think you could move when you celebrate Christmas Day so that we've got more time to do Christmas shopping? It kind of gets in the way. And the physio looked at me and said, do you want me to... He looked at me as if to say, do you want me to punch him for you? This guy didn't see the importance of Christmas. It's the presents that mattered. But we can't get too caught up on that. If you're away one Christmas seeing family, God is still with you. Jesus was still born, even if we're not in church. Paul says in verse 9 of this passage that religion is a weak and miserable force. It's weak. It does not stand up. It's not a house built on a rock. It's a house built on sand. And it makes you miserable. If you are only reading scripture, if you are only praying, if you are only coming to church services, if you're only doing things in church because you feel you ought to, you will probably end up miserable. Because they are just laws. I get it that sometimes it's barren and we think I just keep going and then we get into a good place again. I'm not saying we only do stuff if it feels good for us. But what is it that God has wired you to do? Because religion will enslave us. Karl Barth, the Swiss theologian, said in one of his books, God always makes the first move. God always makes the first move. It's not about us observing laws so that God will come to us. God always comes to us first. In our mess, in our sin, in our potential, in our thriving, none of that makes it more likely that God will come to us or less likely. Richard Rohr said in his book Falling Upwards, which is a wonderful book, the true gospel is always fresh air and spacious breathing. I walked to church this morning doing my prayer app and I thought, I'd love to be down at the beach today. If I was at the beach, I wouldn't be wearing jeans. I'd be in shorts, t-shirt, maybe a vest top to show off my muscles. No, not a vest top. Why did I think that? Because of the breeze coming in off the ocean. The smell of salt in my nostrils. That itchiness of the sea air. Not worrying that you're sweating a little bit because the breeze will wash it away. That spacious environment as you look out over the ocean and you can't see the end of it. The true gospel is always fresh air and spacious breathing. I told you last week at length about going to the Arsenal Trophy Parade with Megan and Noah. I won't go on about it again, but Megan and I met Noah up there. He came down from Manchester. And Megan and I got on the underground, and it was quite packed. Everyone was wearing red and white. And a young lady came on with a beautiful headscarf on, and she looked at me, stood with her friend, and she offered me the priority seat. The priority seat for pregnant people, the elderly and the infirm. I said, "That's very kind of you, my dear, but I'll allow you to sit there." And I looked around at Megan, and Megan burst out laughing. And the young lady who'd sat down burst out laughing, and her friend burst out laughing. I'm not sure if she thought I was pregnant or elderly or infirm. I didn't go into those details with her. Paul says in the next part of the passage, "I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I became like you. You did me no wrong. As you know, it was because of an illness." He's not pregnant, he's not elderly, he's infirm, and he needs a seat on that underground tube ride. "It was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. And even though my illness was a trial to you, you did not treat me with contempt or scorn. Instead, you welcomed me as if I were an angel of God, as if I were Christ Jesus himself. Where then is your blessing of me now? I can testify that if you could have done so, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me. Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth?" These true friends of Paul in his illness have become false friends. They would have torn out their eyes and given them to Paul, and now he's an enemy they want nothing to do with because he's told them the truth of the gospel. Was Paul ill? Was he recovering from injuries and wounds from persecution? We don't know, but we know that it cost the Galatian church as he stayed with them. They in their day didn't handle disfigurement or illness at all well. They couldn't cope with it. And I would suggest that we don't do too well with those kinds of things either. But they welcomed Paul in. They treated him as if he was an angel of God, or even Jesus Christ himself. Can you imagine if Jesus was sat in here today? We'd let him get coffee first, wouldn't we? When the kids stream in like locusts, we'd say to them, "Let Jesus get a chocolate digestive first. You get yours in a minute." "Oh, but Mum." "Wait. It's the Lord of the universe. He picks what he wants." He'd probably take them and give them to the kids, wouldn't he? Multiplying them, making them even better. They treated him like Jesus. They didn't treat him with scorn or contempt. It cost them. And you treated me the same way in the last year when I struggled heading towards burnout. And you said to me, "Take all the time off you need. We love you." One person in this church, and they said I could share this, who disagreed with me on the sexuality discussion and told me about that many times in gracious discussions, when he heard that I was struggling, came to see me in my study and just said, "Neil, can we just lay all that aside? I just want to support you," and gave me a hug. Not contempt, not scorn, and it cost him. What I find interesting here is that God works through Paul, even when he's ill. A few weeks ago, I did the news on the screen, and it was Mental Health Awareness Week. And I was stood in the toilet, if you remember, saying that we've got slides on all the doors saying that if you're struggling at all, please talk to somebody about them. The phone numbers are there. And I started that bit by saying that I'd had mental health challenges in the last few months. And as I saw it on the screen, I cringed. I physically cringed because I thought, I want to have it all together. I want to forget that. I don't want that to be a part of who I was. But it was. Broken and battered. Like every single person in different ways in this room and online. The amazing thing is God uses us even when we're not well. 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul says, Jesus said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. I'm not saying put our weaknesses out there for everyone to see, but we are in a church where we do not need to hide them. And if you're hiding them, find somebody to share with. Because I believe that there is deep solidarity in pain. That actually in our weakness and our vulnerability about that weakness, we are a more close-knit community. There's an Angels fan, 5 years older than me, who when my dad was dying at home and I stood in my mum and dad's bedroom at 2:30 in the morning on Easter Sunday, I looked across the bed with all the medics around us and their busyness, and I saw a guy who was an Angels fan, and it just struck me. And he looked at me as if to say, I'm sorry I'm here in this moment of vulnerability in your life. I'm just doing my job. About a year later, I buried his mum and sat with him in my study as he cried and told me the story of his mum's life through his tears. There was a deep solidarity between him and I on the terraces now that was never there before our pain and our loss. Every anniversary we look at one another and we just nod, and we know what that means. We ran an Alpha course at my last church, and one of the guys who was volunteering to help with it, at the end of it, we had a number of folk place their faith in Jesus. And he just said to me, what do I do with them now? I feel like they're my children. And I said, they are. You have helped them place their faith in Jesus, and you're going to care for them in a very deep way. Paul shows his care for these Galatian Christians in the passage as he says, those people are zealous to win you over, but for no good. What they want is to alienate you from us, so that you may have zeal for them. It is fine to be zealous, provided the purpose is good, and to be so always, not just when I am with you. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you, how I wish I could be with you now and change my tone, because I am perplexed about you. The language here is so intimate. It's as intimate as it can be. It's a mother carrying a child and birthing that child. And Paul, like the guy at Bessel's Green Baptist Church, is saying, this is what it's been like for me to see you become a follower of Jesus. And he finishes the passage not by saying, and this is what we're going to do next. He finishes it by saying, and this is where we've got to with you. I don't know where to go next. I am genuinely perplexed about what is going on. I've given you everything. I've tried to pull you away from these religious systems that don't give you life, and you've just gone back to them like the Israelites of old. I, because of my wiring and my job, get to share my faith with so many people. And I get to share my faith with so many people where it seems to come to nothing. And I go away thinking, I've spent time with you over coffee, over a beer, over a meal, in the terraces, in the church, in the street, talking about Jesus, answering your questions, listening sympathetically, praying for you regularly, and you've just sauntered off because something else better has come up, or the weather has got warmer and you want to go out and about now. God, is anything I do of worth or value? I'm heading into the last 11 years of my paid employed ministry. I know I don't look it. I don't need the seat on the train. Thank you. And it's a weird place to be in. I'm over halfway through, if I stay here till I retire, of my time at TBC. And it's flown by. I'm blessing babies now that I definitely won't marry and quite probably won't baptise. It's a strange place to be in, where 75% of my employed ministry is gone, and only 25%, if I live that long, is ahead of me. And I want to leave a legacy in my life, don't you? Something that others can build on in the generations under me. One of the tech team at the back said to me this morning, we do like doing our tech stuff. One of the young people came and helped last week, and we need to find a slot for them so that they can be involved here. That's that person passing on their legacy and saying, I want you to grow and develop and do these things as well. And I can't help sometimes thinking, God, have I wasted my efforts? How many pointless battles have there been? How many church meetings that we didn't need to have? How many cross conversations that could have been stepped back from? And then I see the little jewels of lives transformed. And I think it's worth it. Amidst all the trials and the struggles, all the challenges that we have, keep going. And as it's true for me, it's true for you in your life as well. To keep serving Jesus when we don't see transformation, when we wonder what is going on. One Canadian minister, Carey Nieuwhof, said, ministry is a series of ungrieved losses. And he said, if you don't stop and grieve those losses, they will accumulate in your life. And I think then they become bitterness. So when someone lets us down, when someone doesn't do things the way we know would probably be best for them, when they walk away from our home group with no explanation, when they move churches for no seemingly good reason, grieve that loss. In my appraisal every year here at TBC, I've failed consistently on one thing. Every year it says, Neil needs to try and learn to not take people leaving so personally. And every year I go, yeah. And every year it pops up again. And the reason it pops up is partly my sinfulness. Why would they leave me? I'm like the living vision of what a minister should be. And part of it is that I think you're blimmin' great. I love this church. I think it's wonderful. Do some of you annoy me? Absolutely. Do I annoy all of you at times? Of course. But I think it's wonderful. So when someone leaves, I think, I don't get it. What is it down the road or up the road that you think you're not going to get here? And I know up the road and down the road are brilliant. I'm kind of doing a dance now, aren't I? But I love my church. And so when people leave, I'm like, Paul, I am perplexed. Why would you go? I shared this with my spiritual mentor a while back, and I said, what I find is that when I get perplexed, I get bitter and I get cynical. And he said, Neil, I think what you're doing is you're trying to carry the church, and you need to let God carry the church, and instead you need to care for it. So pray for it, listen to people, but let God carry the church, because carrying the church is exhausting for you. Caring for it is very different. In your life, who are you trying to carry? I'll fix it, I'll get them through, I'll sort it, and then they wander off. And God said, no, don't try and carry them, let me do that. You care for them. I'll carry, says God, you care. And then maybe you won't be so perplexed at the end of your life.